Well, can I welcome you to the Public Accountability Board, and hope you've all got the agenda and the papers with you, or can see them on screen in some way. Various people to welcome, including Councillors Peter Short, Jim Steinke, Stuart Sampson, David Nevitt, and the chair of our Independent Ethics Panel, Anne McCaskill. We welcome journalists as well, Paul Whitehouse, Danielle Andrews. I think Gareth Dennison is going to hear this a bit later on this morning. We've had some apologies from David Hartley, ACC David Hartley, and from Jackie Bland. Are there any other apologies?
There's Carrie Goodwin, Commissioner.
Thanks, Sally. Anybody else?
No. Erica Redfern.
Was that an apology?
Yeah, Erica Redfern's apology.
Okay, thank you. So moving on in the agenda to item 2, video conferencing and recording. Just to remind you that it is being recorded. So if you don't want to be recorded, then you should either not speak or not reveal yourself, or just simply leave the room and go somewhere else. If the quality of the sound and vision is reasonable, then it'll be uploaded onto our website. Item 3, announcements. I don't think we've got any. Public questions, I don't think we have any of those. Urgent items, we always use this point, or at least we've been doing so during the period of the coronavirus, for the Chief Constable to tell us something around how things are going. So, Chief Constable, we're now in a second lockdown. I wonder if you could give us some sort of assessment of where we're at in the situation, the impact that's having on the police and well-being of the force, and how people are responding to the new restrictions that are upon them, something about the public mood. You might reference the fireworks, the bonfire night last week, because that clearly caused a bit of a stir for people in some parts of South Yorkshire. So, Chief Constable.
Thank you, and good morning, everybody. Yes, of course, we are now in the depths of the second national lockdown. That brings with it some unique challenges, but happily it is a variation, if you like, on a theme as opposed to being entirely new to us now. Unfortunately, it's something that we're having to get used to. What we have retained throughout and continue to retain is all of the partner agencies, from local authorities through to Public Health England, the fire service, the police, and other agencies, including those who look after vulnerable people, all come together in what is called the Local Resilience Forum, or the LRF. And therein lies the hub, if you like, around which our efforts are coordinated, such that we can all pull together on the same end of the same piece of road. From a parochial perspective, from a policing perspective, we are starting to see, as we did in the first lockdown, almost a gentle decline in general demand, because a lot of our business is driven from policing pubs and clubs and the nighttime economy and football matches and the like. And once we don't have those, of course, you start to see some of the general demand falling away. Happily, that then puts us in a position where, despite having some of our own people abstracted because of either shielding or because they themselves have succumbed to the virus, we still have the capacity to be able to take on board business as usual, as well as the additional responsibilities that come with enforcing what are quite stringent regulations. So insofar as the core ability to task and to coordinate, to cope with the demand and what have you, the force is in pretty good shape. That said, we of course are not immune as human beings to the public mood. You know, we all recognise that this has become something of a marathon rather than a sprint. It was probably always going to be that way, but I think the dawning realisation of just the longevity of this as a scenario is proving to be very wearying upon people, and we are seeing a changed public mood in the sense people are, for want of a better phrase, pretty fed up with the current situation, which is, of course, perfectly understandable. And one hopes that a little bit of light perhaps was shone into a dark place yesterday with some of the news around at least the Pfizer people and their clinical results in terms of vaccine trials. So one hopes and keeps one's fingers crossed that brings some relief into the near-term future. It is, of course, not going to change the dynamic now, and therefore we continue to enforce the regulations. And the reason why I mention the public mood is because it is something that we constantly use as a benchmark around which to calibrate our response. We obviously want to be empathetic to the public mood, but we also need to recognise that some of the public mood is resigned to the fact that we are in a second lockdown, but frankly isn't inclined to remain in the public lockdown for any longer than is absolutely necessary, and therefore the majority of people probably take a dim view of those very small minority of people who are breaching the regulations. So probably the majority of people are settling into, as they have done right from the outset, an acceptance, albeit increasingly a reluctant acceptance, of the need to abide by the regulations, and are probably increasingly intolerant of those who would flagrantly breach the regulations. And therefore, in calibrating our response, we are seeing an increase in enforcement on the basis that when we started this process, people needed to be educated and needed to be encouraged. And of course, engagement was something that was front and centre of what we're about before we got to enforcement. That still remains the case, but as we said right at the outset, as time goes on, we start again in using this word, calibrating our response to get more quickly to enforcement, because people are now used to the regulations, however difficult they might be. What I'm happy to report is that whilst we have seen an increase in enforcement, and in some circumstances, frankly, it is still surprising to me that some can be so irresponsible as to arrange a party where you have literally dozens and dozens and dozens of people attending, and frankly, those people are on the end of fines which run into many thousands of pounds, and frankly, that is an issue that they have courted and will have to bear. Those examples, of course, we will rigorously enforce. Insofar as the fireworks issue over the weekend, it was a tale of two halves, really. On the one hand, general demand that comes from this time of the year. Normally, this is a very busy time of the year. In fact, around this time of the year, we're as busy as we are on New Year's Eve generally. So it is a very busy time. We haven't quite seen the levels of busyness, but what we have seen is in isolated pockets, and some cases recently well reported upon in parts of Sheffield, where people have engaged in really foolish behaviours in the misuse of large and therefore potentially very dangerous fireworks, and particularly in circumstances where they've been actually firing fireworks at people. And of course, this is just, again, for want of a better expression, lunacy, in the sense that, these things have the potential to kill. We have had people who have been injured. And in those circumstances, of course, we will clearly investigate these matters very thoroughly on the basis of bringing people to book where such incidents have occurred. But for the most part, that which we did see that falls into that bracket was relatively isolated in small pockets of various communities. and we have taken steps to increase presence and in a couple of cases bring people into custody where we've been able to demonstrate that they in fact have been misusing firearms. And I guess the last point that I'll make is that we will, in working with fire service colleagues, use one or two real examples of people who have come by some injuries through the misuse of fireworks, just to again make the point that these things are potentially very, very dangerous, and people need to take clear responsibility. And very last sentence, I would urge parents at this time of the year, aside from the many other responsibilities, of course, that you have during the restrictions of lockdown, is to make sure that you know where your children are, and moreover, if your children have access to firearms, to fireworks or Freudian slip there, because the two things are basically interchangeable when misused. But when your children have access to fireworks, they really shouldn't have, other than under your direct supervision. And frankly, my advice would be to parents: know what your children are doing, and if they are messing around with fireworks, you should be taking steps to prevent it.
Thank you very much. Yes, I must say I was very surprised on the morning after going around my local battlefield of fireworks to discover the size of some of the fireworks that were being used the night before, and they had names like The Weapon and Manic Night, and I'd never seen that before. So whether there's been an upping of the ante here, I don't know, but it's something that it's alarming, I think, when people use fireworks in that way. Thank you very much, Chief Constable. Moving on in our agenda then swiftly to urgent items. That's, I think, the whole of that. I noticed Julie Grocott, Councillor Julie Grocott has joined, so we welcome her. Item 6, no items to be considered in the absence of the public and the press. Item 7, are there any declarations of interest? Item 8, minutes of the meeting held on the 13th of October, been circulated. Any question as to their accuracy? Everybody happy with those? Thank you. Then we come to matters arising. This is item 9, page 13. Michelle.
Yes, morning, Commissioner. There's 3 items that haven't yet been discharged. The first 2 relate to the format of reports. So the format of the district template will be developed for the December meeting between Sally in our office and Ali Fletcher from the force. The second item, number 393, is on the work programme in relation to the receipt of future reports. It's treating people fairly next time. The third one relates to a public space protection order that's been discussed with Sheffield City Council for the Page Hall area. This is a responsibility that's with the council. I don't know whether Fiona is on the line, but she was liaising with a couple of officers that have been put forward in Sheffield City Council to know the update there. Fiona?
Apologies, just coming off mute on there. I've emailed them last week and I haven't yet received a response, so I'll forward that as soon as it comes through.
We'll keep pursuing that one, Commissioner. The last one is discharged, so that completes the actions.
Okay, thank you very much. Any other comments on the actions? On the Sheffield City Council one, it is a bit disappointing that we haven't had a response because it's an important issue and it keeps coming up. So if there are councillors from Sheffield who are on the line, perhaps they might take it up as well. Thank you very much. Shall we move to item 10 then? This is under the heading of forced performance reporting. And the first of those, item 10, is the Rotherham District Summary Report. And these are pages 15 to 30 in the bundle. And I think we probably have Steve Chapman on the line.
Yeah, good morning, Commissioner. You have got me
District
doing a bit of a double act with our... Yes, can you hear me there, Commissioner?
I can, thank you, and I can see you, which is very good. And you've got your new superintendent, I think, Lynn Knox, who we have heard before but have not seen. I don't know whether she can show herself as well.
Good morning, Commissioner.
We can hear, but now we can see you. Right, okay. Well, we were remarking last time on how we'd had someone with your accent in Rotherham before. Now it's even more extraordinary that you look not unalike, shall we say, in some respects.
I feel very flattered by that comment. I'm not sure I would, but I certainly feel very flattered. Thank you.
Well, there we are. I'm recovering from the shock of this. Well, just you know the routine here. We have these very full reports from the districts, and we thank you for that. We've read them through, so we know what's in them. And I take you to one or two items that have made me sort of think more deeply about things, ask you to comment on them, and then if we've missed something that you think is really very important, we allow you to come back and take us back to that. So I'm starting off with the Rotherham report today on page 17, and it's around the very important issue of domestic abuse. This is under the heading of protecting vulnerable people in our police and crime plan. So domestic abuse, and we know we all were very concerned with what was happening to domestic abuse during the lockdown and during the periods of restrictions, and now we're in lockdown again, so you may want to comment a little more widely around that. But I was interested in page 17, 3.3. You talk there about your specialist team of around domestic abuse, but also this specialist DA scene attender, and I wondered if you could say a word about what that is and what they do.
Yes, Commissioner, we brought that in at the beginning of COVID when the force put forward a request for us to consider what additional resources might be appropriate that we could bring in at that time in order to support us on what we might want to do going forward. And clearly, as you rightly point out, domestic abuse, a risk that people are still in their houses, they're not reporting domestic abuse, and how can we encourage people to come forward? So under using that initial funding, Kath Wallace, who was brought into post then and is still there now, her role predominantly is first and foremost, we'll have an incident that's reported. We will get victims who are reluctant to continue with engagement after first report, through fear, through coercion, through control. She builds up those relationships, makes the links with Rotherham and also with the IDVAs, and then builds up that level of trust where we see an improvement on support for police investigations and prosecutions. She's dovetailed into the reconfigured domestic abuse team, so you can see the uplift on there, and is doing a really good role.
So it's very much a victim-focused post, this one. I just wondered whether one was enough.
Well, I'll be honest, Commissioner, if I could have another three or another, I would certainly do that. And what we've got from a force perspective is some flexibility in respect of how we develop the model. So at the minute, it's been a case of uplifting our investigators and uplifting our IOs in order to manage the investigations themselves. That additional victim support, if you like, and focus is coming from our IDVAs and Rotherham Rise, in addition to the scene attendant. Okay,
thank you very much. Can I move you on to 3.6, Child Exploitation? Again, with the lockdown and the restrictions, real anxieties around theirs, what's happening to children, not only sexual exploitation, but criminal exploitation generally. And I wondered if you could say something around that, and particularly the work of the Evolve team that you mentioned here, and that's a multi-agency team, and how that's working out.
Well, that team's been ongoing since about 2016, Commissioner. Yeah. It is a multi-agency team, as you can see documented there, with respective workers from social care, from the police, from Bernardo's and other victim services, who look to do and ensure that we minimise any trauma from any person who's reporting child exploitation, all the way through from initial report to court appearance. The relationships in those teams are working very, very well. The quality of investigations is good. There are sometimes some really complex cases in there, which we've got a few at this moment in time. And they dovetail into other processes, such as the weekly intelligence meeting that we have around child exploitation, as well as the more strategic partnership meeting, which makes sure that we're delivering on, key areas such as are we still getting the intelligence feeds in that we would expect around locations, victims and suspects. So, for example, in respect of that more strategic partnership, one thing that was raised probably 3 months ago was what can we do in order to keep that at the forefront of people's minds, because we know that while COVID's ongoing and it's a big topic of conversation, exploitation never goes away for children. So what do we do to keep that at the forefront? So we've just finalised as a partnership a video which is a joint video between the police and the council, which focuses predominantly on hotels and what they may see in respect of signs and signals around child exploitation. But it also breaks up into segments that we can utilise across education, across the police themselves, across the council, housing, etc. And is something that we'll be launching in Safeguarding Week, which is only a week or two away there now. And we'll utilise for the rest of the year just to keep it at the forefront of people's minds.
Yeah. Now, a lot of that would be true whether we had coronavirus or not. Have there been some particular issues around coronavirus, the lockdown, etc.?
By that, are we talking about a reduction in referrals or delays in investigation?
It could be any of those things. I just wonder whether you'd notice differences in that way. But
well, the short answer, sir, is no. I would suggest that people are working differently. So when we have our meetings, we're doing it, remote working. We're more agile and flexible about what we're doing. But agencies are still coming together in order to do the investigations. The referral side of things, we haven't seen much of a difference in referrals. There's been a slight lag when COVID first came in, but it's soon picked back up. And I would suggest that the numbers are pretty much consistent.
Okay, thank you. Moving on to page 20. I think it begins on 20. This is what's happening to crime and antisocial behaviour. We're under that sort of heading now. And I'm looking at the graph on page 20 and then turning over to page 21. And I wonder if you could say something around the issues here, what's happening to crime, and particularly, as you know, burglary is an issue, residential burglary is an issue that people of Rotherham often talk to me about, contact me about, and we have concerns around there. So I wonder if you could say something about that, because we saw a falling away of residential burglary when the first lockdown came, and then crime began to rise again. If you could say something around residential burglary.
Okay. Yes. So, well, first and foremost, those graphs from page 20 moving on to 21, you can see clearly from July of this year that crime began to increase from the initial lockdown, and then it peaked in September of this year, and you can see where we're starting to actually draw that back down, and we've pretty much through, I would suggest, strong management from both command team level all the way through the front line, we've managed to make sure that those increases haven't been as significant as previous year. So overall recording of crime is less this year than it has been in the past too. If you then actually look at burglary for Rotherham, what you can see there is from June to September, we've seen a 19% reduction in residential burglary when we compare it with the preceding 4 months. In addition to that, if you compare the same period with the year before, as in 2019, there was a 33% reduction in active investigations linked to burglary. Now, this report actually goes on all the way up to September, but if we also look, whilst it's not in the report, for October, we had, I think it was 77 reports of burglary, which again is a 40% reduction on the same period last year. If you were to ask what's the key reasons for that, I think one of the main mantras for Rotherham is around outstanding suspects. So when a suspect's identified, we look to get them in as quickly as possible. So we have no suspects at this moment in time who are over 12 weeks old. But if you were to look at sack crime, that is a priority along with a number of other crime types. And when they come in, we get them in straight. So when they're identified, we make sure the investigation's right, but we'll get those suspects in pretty quickly. We'll refer them into the likes of IOM where appropriate for diversion and support. But again, if that doesn't work, we'll soon pick them up and put them behind bars if that's appropriate, which again, there's an example in the report.
Yes, you reference burglary on page, or suspects, outstanding suspects on page 23 following. And I'm interested to hear what you were saying there, because that clearly is an important matter. And some of those outstanding suspects will be burglars. In fact, you mentioned it in the...
Yes, there will. Out of all of those suspects, we will have approximately 4 that are for serious acquisitive crime right now, burglary.
Yeah, thank you. I'll take you on to page 24. And you're talking there about stop and search, which is, again, an area of concern to some people in our communities. And this is 4.21. And I just wondered what had happened to the scrutiny panels during the period of lockdown and whether there's any hope of that being restored in any way.
On that, Commissioner, I couldn't tell you exactly when it was, but we have had a scrutiny panel during COVID. I'd have to double check that with the Chief Inspector who leads on it. But over and above that, we've also taken stop search to the Independent Advisory Group, as well as discussing burglary and how we can improve burglaries. So the example for the Independent Advisory Group around burglary was 2 years ago we had a victim who wasn't very satisfied with our service. We brought that video on where the issues were and ultimately what we've done to improve it. And it was only 2 weeks ago on a Twitter feed that we've got that same burglary victim who updated our good selves and said that she could clearly see the improvements that have been made across the district. And it was just to say a great thank you on taking notice of what she'd had to say at that particular time.
Thank you. I missed something that I was going to refer to. So if I take you to the top of page 24, it's 4.17, and you mentioned there an organised crime gang coordinator. And I wonder if you could just say a word around that, what that is and what they will do. And
yeah. So the fundings came from the Safer Rotherham Partnership. And what we have is we have a monthly disruption meeting which has all partners around the table and is chaired by the Detective Chief Inspector. This is where they discuss specific organised crime groups and opportunities for disruption. The organised crime coordinator will actually bring together on a more regular basis these different agencies, whether that's HMRC, whether that's the Border Force, whether that's, work and pensions or immigration. That coordinator will be responsible for highlighting and identifying particular themes in groups and not just waiting on a monthly basis to actually make contact with other agencies outside the police to make sure we take every opportunity for disruption that we can. Organised crime is a priority for the SRP, so it seemed like a perfect fit. Funding will start in April.
absolutely. Thank you very much. On to page 25, towards the bottom of the page, 4.27, and you mentioned community action partnerships, which we have heard about before, CAPS, and I wonder if you could say a little word about them and how that's going. Are these police, are they the old PACTs by another name?
The short answer, Commissioner, is yes. We have 21, and it was a partnership request that we called them community action partnerships rather than PACT. We were happy to do so. They will generally be attended by, it may well be a local councillor, you may well get a PCSO there or a PC, sometimes it'll be a sergeant, there will be other people invited. The groups take different formats depending on where they're at, but it's all about talking about low-level information and intelligence around particular themes that are causing a concern in the community. It's equally an opportunity for the police and council to report back on what activities taking place in those particular areas against those particular themes.
Thank you. Yes, it seemed to me it was a good chance to reset things a little here, because pacts, I think there's been a withdrawal of many people who used to attend, many organisations, agencies that used to attend pacts, which began as partnership and community groups, and but the P became police so very often, and you were often the last one standing there from the representative groups, whereas here now you're emphasising partnerships, and that's important, I think. Thank you. Moving on to page 28, which is around, I'm aware that we're missing lots of things, but we can come back if you want to do that. On page 28, 4.34, this is off-road bikes, boy racers and the general nuisance there. I think there's been some success there in the Corton Wood area and elsewhere. I think the public have been very grateful for what the police have been able to do there, along with other partners. I wonder if you could just say how you think that's going.
Yeah, well, I think I would start with the background, Commissioner, and the background being that Rotherham's performance. So when I've taken over as commander, it was building on the success of the previous district commander, and it was always the plan to, as well as be able to turn the numbers, it would be about looking at the quality of the investigations that take place, with a particular focus on problem solving. So what you've got here is a couple of examples. First and foremost, the detailed one that you can see is from our central neighbourhood team working with Rotherham Metropolitan Borough Council and some other agencies such as Shiloh, to look at the antisocial behaviour and burglary trends that we had in the town for the last probably 8 months. What you can see there is the serious acquisitive crime levels that are going down in figure 3. And whilst you can see there is an increase, a correlation around ASB, a lot of that was linked to the COVID effect, which we've already discussed. So there are some real good results around crime reduction there and begging. When we then move it on to Corton Wood, one of the big parts of the problem solving there was actually to get crime prevention involved and get some real strategic managers together to make a decision around some secure gates to the car parks. It sounds quite an easy thing to do, but when you're cutting across boundaries and you're dealing with both private and public sectors, it wasn't that straightforward. But actually getting those gates in and getting them locked at the right times has made a significant difference to the calls for services around Corton Wood. And in respect of the golf club, a lot of that again was about getting partners round the table with a timely response and actually using our off-road motorbike team, as well as looking at ways to deter off-road motorcyclists from going anywhere near the area. And again, that seems to be working quite well.
I have some members of those local groups who say they want to do their own community speed watch type activity. Is that something that can be encouraged or is happening?
You know, that is something I would welcome. I have seen it done in other forces before, and I think it's a really good engagement tool for the local communities to be doing their own speed watch in their own areas. We could supply the appropriate equipment. Some hurdles to overcome around health and safety, training around the equipment, access to police information, to be able to upload, you know, the number of vehicles that have been identified for speeding, the number of letters that have been going out. But for me, it's a good idea and something we should promote. And it's something that I started with last year, having conversations with certain councillors, and it's something I think we can progress further.
So if people come to us asking for that, we can refer them to you?
You can.
Okay.
Yeah, Commissioner. Just to add in relation to the off-road bikes, we're also scoping best practice nationally, starting, funny enough, at the PSNI. We have a conference call tomorrow because I know they have got some successful initiatives in Northern Ireland at the moment in relation to that activity. as well as sharing experiences in terms of our problem-oriented policing. So we are looking at the evidence bases, and we are looking at the best practice on a national level as well as local level. So just to add that.
Thank you. Is this something that increases with lockdown? Is it a kind of an outlet for people?
I wouldn't be sure. I know that it was quite prevalent back home, so I'm not sure in South Yorkshire.
Okay. Very diplomatic. Thank you. Chief, Steve, if I can take you then to page 29 and recruitment, and I wondered if you could just say a word around that, because obviously we're anxious to increase the number of police officers we've got and to have police officers who are representing their communities, i.e. Not just points about ethnicity now, but locality. Are people coming forward from the Rotherham district to be police officers?
Well, the short answer is we're starting to generate applications. So from a Rotherham perspective, we dovetailed into the force-wide campaign for recruitment. The wider campaign, as well as encouraging minority groups to come forward. But what's bespoke for Rotherham is some of our recent meetings where we've had some challenges to say, look, you're not really representative of your community. We don't really see BAME officers who seem to be succeeding in rank and actually don't seem to be flourishing. So my pushback was, well, actually, are you aware of... So I named several inspectors, and I named a chief inspector who often works as a superintendent. And they said, no, actually I wasn't. So they gave some advice around maybe we would like to put these people forward if they were willing, just to put them out across the community to say, this is the role I do, this is how well I'm flourishing in South Yorkshire Police, this is why it's a really good job. And so that work is ongoing as we speak. The person coordinating that is Abdul Aziz, who is currently the inspector in our Safe and Neighbourhood Service. But he's utilising officers across the force. We've had a couple of online chats with the community. His next step, COVID permitting, and when it's appropriate to do so, is to go into the colleges and the nearby universities just to go with these people and encourage those applications.
Thank you. I wonder whether anybody else on the call wanted to pick up on anything. Anyone from my office, perhaps?
No, Ellen, I don't think there's anything else. Thank you.
Okay, or any of the officers, senior command team officers?
Alan, I just only just very briefly, just to of course, understandably, time prevents us from going through, every iota and nuance of what has been a very comprehensive report. But just to echo your own observations, that it's a report that is densely packed with really good initiatives that are being well managed and are making a difference to the public. So, I just wanted to reflect my own sense that the report does set out quite an attractive prospectus for people to see how at least that part of the organisation is being managed as reflects life in Rotherham, and I think it's being effectively managed. And I just wanted, in this forum, as you have done, Alan, just to formally welcome Lynn as well. Of course, we're very pleased to have brought Lynn over across the water, so to speak. And she, I think, will be a first-class addition to our senior command team. So we're very pleased to have Lynn with us, and I'm pretty sure that the people of Rotherham will benefit significantly from her wide experience and commitment. So we're very pleased to have Lynn join us.
Thank you very much, Chief. Yes, we seem to have a pipeline now from Northern Ireland direct to Rotherham.
We take the best people from wherever we can get them.
Of course. Steve or Lynn, is there anything that you wanted to point us to in the report that we haven't mentioned and you think is noteworthy? I mean, it's all good stuff, but
I think you've picked out the salient points, certainly from my perspective, and I'll let Lynn speak for herself. But I think key going forward is just embedding neighbourhood policing, really focusing on problem solving and looking at the quality of our investigations. So we may well go out and investigate a crime and put an appropriate response to it. But have we actually considered the wider approach around how many times we've been there previously, and have we done enough to stop us going back again? And that's pretty much the mantra that we're doing going forward. That would be it from me. Anything from you, Lynn?
I think just that we are very much focusing on empowering our officers and focusing on victims and really pushing that agenda. But equally, I think there's opportunities to enhance our abilities in terms of tackling organised criminal gangs by maximising and building those building blocks that are already there in terms of the Her Majesty's Revenue and Customs. In other words, we can be hitting at some of those issues which are deemed smaller issues in terms of benefit fraud, etc. But sometimes those are things that can be much more impactful, and those are some of the conversations we're taking forward. And that's all, sir.
Yeah, no, I agree. I think that disruptive work is very important. So it was good to see what you're doing in Rotherham. Well, thank you very much indeed for those comments and for the report. That was item 10, forced performance Rotherham. Item 11, this is pages 31 to 45 in the pack, and I think this may be Tim.
Yes, it is, Commissioner.
Reporting on protecting vulnerable people. That's our police and crime plan priority. So I'll do the same with you, Tim, if I may. I'll take you to some pages and then ask you to comment on anything that you think we've missed. Again, it's a very full report and there's lots we could pick up on. But if I take you first to page 34, and I was interested, this is what's happening again to domestic abuse under lockdown, particularly the children. During that time. And it's a very worrying time for children who may be trapped in a particular situation. Operation Encompass, and I noticed there on page 34, 3.18, that we've got these relationships with schools across the county, with the exception of Barnsley, seemingly, and I wondered if you could just say a word around that.
Well, let me just talk a little bit more broadly about Operation Encompass. Obviously, you know, you've already referenced concerns about domestic abuse during lockdown. Domestic abuse, as we all know, is very often a hidden crime. Often it will have happened 20 or 30 times before someone actually calls the police. So, and that's in normal circumstances. So I think concern that it's potentially more hidden during lockdown is well founded. It is something that we've got to monitor. But often the one outlet will be children presenting at school, and it's really important that where children are witnesses to domestic violence in the home, that the school are made aware, so that the school can not only support that child, but can also be very alert to the signs that repeat behaviours occurring, even when it's not reported to us. And Operation Encompass is about actually notifying the schools. You'll be aware through the county-wide safeguarding board that this has been something that we have been trying to implement across all schools, both within the state and independent sector, across all districts. And our desire would be that we have this relationship with every single school across the county. At the moment, we've got good engagement with Rotherham, Sheffield and Doncaster. Not all schools are signed up at the moment, but we are working towards that. Barnsley is somewhat behind that. I think that at the heart of that has been a resources issue, because once you start to notify people, it's not just good enough to know about it, you have to do something about it. As you'll see from the report, we are presenting both ourselves and Sheffield Local Authority the implications and the resource implications of Operation Encompass and the benefits of it to the Barnsley Schools Alliance, and it is very much our hope that we'll be able to continue to expand that programme throughout the county so that sometime next year we do realise that ambition that every school in the county is engaged with Operation Encompass. I do think it's really, really important because, we talk about the impact of adverse childhood experiences, the impact of childhood trauma on future life chances, and this is one that I feel particularly strongly about, that we have to get right, and I think this is a key mechanism for doing that.
Thank you. And that takes me to page 35, and a piece of research that is referenced here from 3.25 onwards, the N8 group of universities doing some research into what has happened during the lockdown to people, victims of domestic abuse. I wonder if you could just say a word about that. And when, of course, I guess when this was commissioned, we didn't know we were going to a second lockdown, but there we are. I wonder if you could say something about when this report might come out.
I couldn't give you a specific time of when it's due. I think, as with all academic research, it will be an in-depth report. But I do think it's important that we get independent evaluation of some of these initiatives. The fact that we are looking at the lockdown period, and as you say, we didn't know there was going to be a second lockdown, and who knows where we might be throughout the early part of next year. I think it's really important that we do get an evaluation of the effectiveness of some of the initiatives that we've put in place. But I think that lockdown or no lockdown, the simple fact of the matter is domestic abuse is so often a hidden crime. That's just exacerbated by the lockdown. So there'll be lessons to be learned from the evaluation of these initiatives, irrespective. If life is back to normal by the spring, and we shall remain hopeful that it is, there'll still be lessons for us to learn in terms of refining the effectiveness of our interventions around domestic abuse. So I think it's a really, really important piece of work, and it's absolutely right and proper that we seek academic evaluation, independent academic evaluation of those, so it informs our future practice.
Absolutely. Turning over the page 36, helping those who are victims and survivors of CSE and CCE, human trafficking and slavery. In 3.28, you mentioned there the NPCC recommended vulnerability assessment tool, VAT. And I wonder if you could say, again, something around that, and whether there's going to be support here, not just for the children, but for the broader families.
Yeah, so what this is about is effectively about trying to standardise. I don't need to rehearse it, but South Yorkshire Police, as has and our partners, alongside many other police forces and local authorities and partners across the country, have learnt an awful lot about the exploitation of children in the last 10 years, and from everything that was done 5, 6, 7 years ago to understand and combat child sexual exploitation, and in particular on street grooming, and how we've developed that, looking at the broader criminal exploitation of children, and that's then gone to develop into county lines and the exploitation of children across different areas, which in effect is a form of modern slavery at its most extreme. We've learnt an awful lot about that over the years, and what this tool is for is effectively trying to standardise that into a risk assessment that will ensure consistency of assessments in all cases. And by using that, then it allows us then to be able to talk with partners about a range of risk factors that present and standardise them, and make sure that we can then provide support and prioritise accordingly. You'll see in paragraph 3.29 it talks there in Sheffield about multi-agency child exploitation meeting, and that can then look at the child, look at what are the causes of that particular child being exploited, and actually look to tackle those causes. Now, on occasions, that may be about support for the broader family. It might be about some of the risks that child is exposed to from the broader family, but it can look at a bespoke approach, looking at a range of standard factors.
Yeah, thank you very much. Can I take you to page 38? 38. Moving now to the equally important area of mental health. The heading at the top of the page is mental health, SYP partnerships, working with the NHS, etc., helping those in crisis to obtain the right help from the right service at the right time. I was particularly interested in paragraph 3.44, and this whole question of transportation, waiting times, lots of issues in there and around that. I wonder if you could say a word about exactly what the problem is there, and this suggestion in 3.47 that you may have to have bespoke mental health vehicles or conveyance to deal with this.
So, Commissioner, again, if I take you back a little bit on the journey that we've been on with mental health, it wasn't that long ago where, and I say not that long ago, it's been a number of years now where we actually ended up having to bring people who've been detained under 136 of the Mental Health Act to a police station as a place of safety. I mean, for any members of the public on the call, it is the power that we use to detain people for their own safety when they're having a mental health episode. And not that long ago, as I said, a number of years ago, because of the lack of hospital provision and the lack of a proper medical setting, we'd actually end up on occasions bringing them to the police station. That doesn't happen in South Yorkshire now, and we have certainly moved to a place where we can get people into a proper medical setting. Our default position has always been that when we come across someone, whether we find them in the street or whether we're called to someone in the street, the default position should be that an ambulance is called to transport that individual to the designated medical setting. And it has become apparent to us that the extent to which that actually happens has declined, certainly over recent months now. In effect, the reason for that is demand and pressure on the ambulance service, which you would have read in the press and heard about locally, is absolutely acute during the COVID period for reasons that are self-evident. What we have in South Yorkshire now is a really strong mental health partnership. I know that you've had presentations in other forums from Chief Superintendent Dan Thorpe, who leads on this area for us. And that means that we're now actively working with partners to come up with different solutions to this, certainly to get us through the immediate period, but perhaps there may be a longer term solution that might be more effective. Ultimately, I and we collectively take the view that a person who is suffering from a mental health episode is undergoing a traumatic episode in their life, and being transported in a police vehicle to a medical setting is not assisting that. It's likely to make that worse. That said, what happens is there's a judgment to be made on the street by the officers. Is if you have to wait an inordinate period of time for an ambulance, is that worse? And these are the judgments that our officers are forced to make. But we're actively engaged with partners to try and work through and look at what would an alternative solution be. I think it's fairly simplistic to say, well, the ambulance service has just got to sort this out, because we recognise as an emergency service ourselves the pressures that they are under.
Yeah, I just wonder if there was any forum where we might take this up, because I'm aware that the police have a police and crime commissioner who can raise things politically in that way. Fire and Rescue Service have their fire authority again, can raise things that way. I don't know where the ambulance service might go in that small p political sense.
If it's now, Deputy, if we just interject at that point.
Mark, yes.
I think as Tim's alluded to, I don't think there's any lack of will on the part of the ambulance service or any of the other health agencies about tackling this issue, and we do have the dialogue. I think it purely is an issue around capacity. So there's no quick fix to be able to, speak to the right people, do the right tasking, and suddenly free up capacity. And I think, particularly at the moment, just with core business, we do see the ambulance service under tremendous pressure So I think we do have that dialogue. We do try and work as best we can with them, and we try and be supportive. And you see that when we deploy our ARBs to deal with people who are having heart attacks and the like. Not our core goal, but we'd always try and do it because we're there to preserve life. One observation I was going to make around this is that, of course, when people are having a mental health episode, they are in crisis, and we do regard them as vulnerable people. But we can't lose sight of the fact as well that on occasions, as well as being vulnerable themselves, some people can pose a significant risk both to other members of the public, themselves, and our officers. So it's a very difficult one. On occasions, actually, someone going in a police van might be the right thing to do, but it just paints the picture of the level of complexity that our frontline people need to do. And sometimes these incidents are subject to scrutiny review over a period of months or even years, and our people try to do that very difficult assessment on the streets.
No, I agree with that, and I think the judgments that officers have to make can be quite extraordinary, really. You've got to be able to recognise that this is a mental health issue and not something else. And then judgments around, as you were saying, waiting times. At what point do you say, well, we're just going to have to use a police vehicle, even though we know that's not the appropriate thing to do? So they are very difficult judgments and issues. Thank you. Can I take you on to page 41? This is around, it's at towards the bottom of the page, improving how the public contact the police, including improved 101 services. And you reference there in para 3.65, 16 digital desk operators. Again, I think the public would be interested to know what exactly is going on here. Who are these people and what is a digital desk?
So, Commissioner, the pressure on the 101 service is something that we've discussed at PAB many times. You'll also be aware of as a result of the work that's been undertaken by colleagues, that is in a significantly better place than it was perhaps 12 or 18 months ago. It's quite clear, though, that the public are used to dealing with many public services using an online service, the ability to use live chat, the ability to use online forms. And as a result of the investment that we've made in Smart Contact, our new contact management system that's been embedded for over a year now, we've now got the facility to be able to do that. And we have a desk of 16 people who are effectively digital operators. So they will be able to have live chats with members to deal with issues, to be able to deal with the receipt of online reporting of crime, the submission of online forms, that sort of thing. So what it does is open up new lines of communication with which the public can contact us and allow us to be able to satisfy any inquiries that they may have.
Thank you. Can I take you finally from me to page 44? And you talk there, this is 3.83 and following, you talk there about complete victim care, support of victims. Again, I wonder if you just say something in general terms about what's been happening during the first lockdown. Now we're into a second period of lockdown with care, support for victims, support for witnesses, because clearly if you're going to have trials and they're going to be successful, you need victims to be able to hold up and to get there, and you need witnesses likewise to hold up and get into court. Just something around that, Tim, to reassure us.
So complete victim care is very much about placing victims of crime at the heart of what we do. And, you have seen and we've talked about the significant improvement in response times. On far more occasions than we ever did, we're getting to victims of crime and calls for service in a timely manner. We've got a big programme around improving investigative standards to make sure that when our officers arrive and are investigating crime, they're doing it in a professional manner and they're taking account of all the inquiries that need to be done and making sure that they're up to speed with the latest investigative techniques to be able to maximise the opportunity to investigate that crime effectively. It's about agreeing with the the victim about how they want to be contacted, when they want to be contacted, making sure that they're being provided with a victim services book so they know about how to access things like victim support and other support services that can assist people getting over, on occasions, the trauma of being a victim of crime. We've seen our satisfaction rates that we measure internally about the police response rise consistently over the last 12 months. So now, regularly, over 80% of victims are satisfied with the service that we provide. Now, that's something distinct as regards the witness service, because you are aware, and I know you're aware through the local criminal justice board, some of the challenges that the courts have had in terms of backlogs as a result of particularly the first lockdown and effectively the courts coming to a standstill, and lots of trials being delayed. One of my big concerns has always been that the longer you leave it, I suppose the saying is justice delayed is justice denied. The longer you leave it, witnesses, one, might change their mind and not want to go to court because it's happened so long ago. But also we're in a position where we're going to ask someone potentially to get in the witness box and recall an event that might have taken place over 12 months, maybe 18 months earlier. And that on occasions, one, can be more difficult, but two, maybe a more intimidating experience for a witness, particularly if they've never given evidence before. And you add that in with some of the, I suppose, and it's not for the want of effort of the courts to get things up and running again, and I don't for 1 second suggest it's not been difficult, but there's definitely been elements of trials being on and then trials being off, and a stop-start, I suppose, return to normality for the courts. That's put pressure on the witness service, where we're ringing and warning witnesses for court and then having to de-warn them and then re-warn them. And I think that we will get there with that collectively with the courts. The LCJB is working together to look at the impact and the flow of work right across the criminal justice system. But that's been an area that's probably been less than smooth, if I can describe it in those terms. I think that in terms of our initial response to victims of crime, we're doing well. We're doing better than we've ever done in recent years. One of the perennial issues is about follow-up and people understanding what I think we've still got some way to go with that, but we are getting better. But I think where we have charged people and we're waiting for cases to go into the justice system, that's been less than smooth, and I think it'll probably be the middle of next year when we start to see that getting back to some sense of normality.
So these are some of the big Crown Court type trials, really serious crimes.
I think it's all trials, if I'm honest. I think it's most acute in the Crown Court because, if you've got a big trial, a murder trial, for example, where you've got, multiple defendants, and you might have it laid down for anything between 4 and 6 weeks because you've got lots of different witnesses. That's very difficult for the court to run a trial like that. But it's not just the big keynote cases. It's if you've had your house burgled, that is equally as traumatic to the victim of crime. And there may be witnesses, neighbours who've seen something, who have never been involved in the court system before and are faced with the prospect of having to go to court and give evidence, which if you're not used to it, can be a worrying experience. And it's really important that as soon as possible, we collectively get back to a situation where we collectively get back to a situation where when we tell a witness this is the date and time that you're required, that they're stable.
Yeah. So a lot of this support during the period of lockdown will be given remotely to witnesses and to victims.
Well, some of it will, but I think what I'm talking about is in essence the witness service. There's still a witness service at court to meet people, but we do a lot of work, and it's within the criminal justice unit where we are warning witnesses to attend, de-warning witnesses to attend, and I think sometimes those conversations, if you were to speak to some of our witness care people within the CJU, they get, if you actually speak to them, they get a real sense of frustration at times from victims and witnesses that, they've waited an awful long time to see a court case that relates to the crime that they've been the victim of. And if they think it's going to be a particular date and then it's moved back or then it's pulled forward unexpectedly, these things they don't help people come to terms with being a victim of crime.
Yeah, they're difficult enough.
But what I wouldn't want any of this to do, these are observations from speaking to some of our frontline staff. Commissioner, because we've had plenty of meetings with partners in the criminal justice system about it. None of this has been easy, and I wouldn't want to denigrate the courts for making great efforts to get things back up and running now.
No, I agree with that. Both on the local criminal justice board, we've met with those who are doing their best here, but also we've had these national conversations, of course, with Ministry of Justice, civil servants, officials, ministers who understand the problem, because it's a national problem during lockdown. I agree. Thank you, Tim. That was all I wanted to draw attention to, or from my own part, on that report. I wondered if anyone else had anything to say on that report, which was item number 11.
Yes, Commissioner, it's Steve Chapman. I wonder if I could come in.
Oh, we've never had that before, but yes, District Commander from Rotherham. Yeah, Steve, of course, come in.
Commissioner, it's just on the back of Mr. Forber's comments around 3.84. We spoke about the criminal justice route. I think it's worth pointing out that from the end of 2017, the force has focused heavily on out-of-court disposals and use of restorative justice. And as we know, restorative justice is one of the key points in the Victims' Code of Practice. And the reason I mention that is COVID has accelerated that process a little bit because, one, there is delays, or there has been delays for the court process. But secondly, victims quite often don't want to go down that route, and they would like an alternative disposal, which is simple summary justice, whereby it's dealt with quickly, and ultimately the offender just stops from their offending behaviour. And the reason I point that out is when we first started on the complete victim care journey in 2017, Mr. Forber introduced a lady by the name of Tahira, which had come from victim support. This girl was from a minority background, and she suffered racial abuse, and she didn't feel the force dealt with it as well as they could have done. So we weren't that joined up at that point. I think if you bring that all the way around to where we're at right now, if you were to look at that most recent example that came from Sheffield, whereby there was a lady abused because of the colour of her skin, she engaged and was offered with restorative justice. And as a result of a conference done by a local police officer, having had some training around this, she would now go, in her words, with a cup of coffee with the person who abused her at the time. He now understands what he or she understands where they've gone wrong. They understand each other's point of view, and she'd be more than willing to go for a coffee. My point being is satisfaction rates are improving. A lot of it is down to the criminal justice route, but equally we've got other opportunities where we're maximising opportunities, if you like, to give the victim what they want. And that is a good example of where it's happening. Remedy, who is the commissioned service from your good selves, certainly the director there will say that outside of West Midlands, South Yorkshire Police is performing far and away better than the other forces that she's working with at the moment. So I think we're just building up a really good evidence base for what we're doing outside of the criminal justice route as well.
Yes, thank you for that, Steve. It's a good point, and it's probably something that we ought at some point to have a full report on, because I think the public perception of restorative justice is often it's some sort of easy thing for those who have offended, but of course it may be the victims themselves who are wanting RJ, and I think we need to bring that out and show how it does operate and actually make a difference. So thank you for that. Anybody else on that report, or shall we move then to item 12? And Debbie, this is you, I think, pages 49 to 54, the financial update, budget monitoring report for September. Debbie, are you on the line?
I am, morning. Are you happy for me to
Yes. Do you want to just
just
take
an overview of the numbers?
tell us the bad news and try and cheer us up at the end, Debbie? Is the plan?
It's actually slightly better news than last time. So focusing on revenue first then, this is our projected outturn based on spend and projections as at the end of September. So we are reporting a £1.75 million overspend. Now this includes COVID related spend and unrecoverable income, and if we strip COVID out, we're actually in an underspend position of around about £1.5 million. Now there are a number of contributing factors, and I'm going to call this the COVID effect. There are a number of approved growth bids that are not progressing due to COVID, specifically within our estates department, and this is because that department have had to focus on COVID related and officer uplift related activity. Now these schemes have slipped to next year, so it's worth noting that it will add additional pressure to next year's budget, and so we need to pick that up as part of budget setting. But there are other areas as well which are COVID related. Transport is another good example where we are projecting underspends because staff are not travelling around the force. So I do think that underspend position that is emerging is as a result of COVID. Now if I compare it to the last report, which was the end of June position, that overspend has reduced slightly. Last time we reported a £2.6 million overspend, we're now at a £1.75 million overspend. Now we are in a stronger position to understand the impact of COVID, and our projections reflect this. So for example, overtime projections have been challenged, these have reduced, and we've identified underspends in the football area of overtime, so we can use that to offset the district and department reported overspends. Previously mentioned the growth areas. COVID spend within the report is very similar to the June position, even though overall the COVID spend has increased. We've managed to keep costs pretty similar because we've received funding for medical grade PPE, and it's just worth adding there that we submitted a claim for £1.25 million for medical grade PPE. £500,000 of that relates to the current year revenue budget. And we have also recently submitted a claim under the income loss recovery scheme for £366,000. This covers the period April to July, so there will be a further 2 claims to submit. And just by way of background, we have to stamp the first 5% of the income loss, and then we can recover 75 pence in the pound. So we're seeing COVID costs pretty stable at the moment. Now the variances in the report are very similar to the June one, where we're seeing a projected overspend on police pay and police overtime, and we're seeing an underspend on staff pay. But what we are seeing emerging more now, again, because we're in this stronger position to understand COVID, is our income loss. But as I've just explained, we are managing to submit a claim for that. Do you want me to go into some of the variances in more detail, or
there may be some that you want to point out, some of the more significant ones?
Yeah, I mean, police pay is obviously is the main area, which we did start the year over on strength. We have had fewer leavers than predicted, and this may be COVID related, and we have seen an increased number of rejoiners and 30 plus joiners. So that explains why we're in the position we are with the police pay. And overtime really is mainly COVID related, and all of the COVID related overtime is going through the going through our OSU department, the COVID coordination centre. Now the staff pay underspend, this is mainly in the area of uplift and growth posts. So it's not particularly our substantive posts that are there, it's the additional posts we've put in year and again. Because of COVID, it has made it more difficult to recruit to those roles and train people. So we are seeing a bit of a time lag there, but we expect that to catch up. Staff overtime is overspending, partly because of COVID, but partly because of some of these vacancies that we're trying to catch up on. And I've talked about the income recovery, which again, it is COVID related. So for example, things like speed awareness courses, where we're not seeing the level of income that we would normally expect to see. So they're really the main areas to note.
Yeah. Is there we're not in dispute, probably too strong a word, but around with the Home Office around definitions. Are we all agreed what COVID spending is? Are we all agreed what income loss is? Or are there issues around that still?
No issues from my point of view. I mean, we've been given guidance on what we can and we can't claim, and if we have got any queries, we will obviously take that up with the Home Office, and vice versa. They do come back and they ask us questions when we submit those claims. So there's nothing ongoing there really that I'm aware of.
So by the year end, then we should be having sums of money coming in to represent COVID spending, income loss, and so on, which are not yet reflected in the figures, and that should help us as we get towards the year end.
Yeah, we've reflected the PPE income.
Yeah.
But we haven't reflected the income loss as yet. So that will improve the figures going forwards.
Yeah. The only reason I mention that is because it's clearly going to be a very difficult settlement this year as we look towards the next financial year. We've been told not to raise our hopes too much around that, so we're expecting something not unlike the flat cash settlements that we've had in the past, perhaps a bit for inflation, who knows, but nothing. It's not going to be Christmas, it's not going to be Santa Claus for us when the settlement is announced just before Christmas. Then it's going to be a very tight settlement, and the government are also still saying, as I understand it, they are still looking for cashable savings next year. We've got to show those that we've made that effort, so it's not going to be easy.
No, it certainly isn't. We're still in a different position than we were 12 months ago.
Right.
Just that is the revenue that I've covered. If I could just briefly touch on capital. Yeah. If you recall at the last meeting, Sophie updated at the meeting that we'd reviewed the capital programme and we'd reset the budget. So just a reminder that we started out with £20.6 million and we reduced that downwards to £14 million. And the way we did that is we looked at the priorities of the schemes and we set the budget based on our priorities 1 to 3, which was really schemes that had already started, were in motion, were due to start, and schemes around the officer uplift. And what we did say was if all the schemes spent to budget, we would see a capital overspend of £6.5 million. But based on experience of where we see increased underspends and slippage coming out towards the end of the year, we felt it prudent and it wasn't, not too risky to set a lower level budget. So we've done that. What we are now starting to see, as is the case as we progress throughout the year, we are starting to see the odd scheme identify as slippage, which supports us with what we've done in terms of reducing the budget. So the biggest one to note is our Doncaster Police Station and custody suite, which I know you're aware of. We've had problems with purchasing the land and sewerage there, so it's not, it's understandable why that scheme is slipping. What I have done at the moment is kept the capital programme in balance, but we do need to keep that under review, and we will obviously highlight to you if we do see any potential overspends in this area. But I think given where we are at the moment, I think let's keep it in balance and just keep that under review as the year progresses.
Yeah, and borrowing costs are very low, so there's not likely to be a huge impact on revenue budgets as a result of that. Mm-hmm. I was on a call yesterday with the chief economist at the Bank of England, Andy Haldane, and he was saying he'd never known borrowing costs so low, and he thought that would go on for decades, was his view. So this is the time to borrow, seemed to be the bottom line. Thank you. Anybody want to comment? Sophie, is that Sophie?
It is Sophie, yeah. Just going back on the borrowing rates that you were just talking about, the borrowing rates are very low at the moment. But unfortunately, so are the investment rates as well. So it's actually to undertake internal borrowing at the moment, which is in line with our strategy. But we can that's constantly under review, as you're aware anyway. So we should be able to pick that up. But yeah, that's just the flip side of it to bear in mind that borrowing may be low, but so is investment as well.
No, absolutely right. Thank you. Any other comments on that report? Okay, thank you very much, Debbie, for that. So we'll move on to item 13, which is in the name of Lauren, I think, pages 55 to 58. This is a report it's titled Crimes Affecting Older People. Lauren, if you're introducing this, just a word of warning here, just be careful, tread carefully. So crimes affecting older people. Where's Lauren? I can't see her on my screen.
Good morning, Commissioner. I'm just setting camera on. Is it?
You're not. Oh, there you are. Well, you're sort of visual. You're a kind of silhouette.
Apologies. I'll try and move around the table and see if that works.
Might be easier than moving the house through degrees. But
so you just get the background noise of the chairs moving.
No, we can see you now. Okay. Do you want to introduce this? Because clearly we're becoming an ageing population as the years go by, and therefore crimes affecting older people, serious matter.
Yes. So I will tread carefully. The definition that is used for older people is age 65 plus. That's the age bracket that was used by HMIC-FRS in the report that they did last year, the correlation report, where they sort of did an initial scoping really of crimes affecting older people. We're still waiting for the NPCC lead to confirm that that's the sort of policing agreed age category for older people, but it's the one that we anticipate will be used, and it's certainly the one used by CPS. So that's the one that we've used for this statistical analysis. So it's quite a brief report, but it does highlight some fairly salient points. So as you've already mentioned, Commissioner, we do have an ageing population. About 18.1% of the South Yorkshire population is now over 65 compared to 16.5% 10 years ago. So it's a slow increase, but there's a definite increase, and it's an upward trajectory there which we expect to continue. What this piece of analysis has shown us, and
that's because people are living longer rather than the sheer numbers are increasing.
Yeah, it's people living longer and a lower birth rate as well, I believe.
Right.
So we have less young people coming through and people are living longer. So the two ends of the spectrum, really. So what the analysis has shown us, and we do now have a performance dashboard, which is an ongoing reference point for us, is that actually people aged over 65 are less likely to be a victim of crime than people under the age of 65, but that they are definitely overrepresented in some categories. And the report will give some information around those. And it's not just crime categories as well, there are some incident categories which older people are more statistically represented in. So, for example, as you probably expect, bogus officials, it's likely older people significantly more represented in that. About 85% of the force's bogus official reports involve older people. And whilst it's not broken down, I would anticipate that a number of them are significantly over the age of 65 as well. It's certainly something that I tend to associate with people older than that.
Is that because people are at home, or because they're at home and older?
I think it's because they're at home and they're older. And sadly more likely to be trusting as well if somebody turns up at the door and says that they are an official, whether it's as a police officer, whether it's somebody from the electricity company, just far more likely to believe that really as an older person.
Extraordinary. I mean, they've obviously never met my wife. I have to produce my identity when I get home of an evening. But
well, when she doesn't let you in, if you want to give us a call. So there's a table in there which shows the type of offences that disproportionately affect older people, and we've also got some incidents in there. So, for example, confused and missing people, again, incidents that tend to be more reported with older people, and again, something that I would suspect an age group above 65. But without actually having the analysis to back that up, that's just a sort of personal view from me. So in initial reporting and ongoing investigation, we obviously consider all factors around vulnerability and make appropriate referrals. And we've got a number of specific pieces of work ongoing for example, op signature, where we have people specifically engaging with older people to ensure that they are they're aware of the risks and informed as to what they can do about it. And of course, this deeper insight that we're getting helps us to shape our training for the future, helps us to inform officers as to what to look out for in relation to older people, and also helps us with those prevention messages as well to prevent people from becoming victims in the first place. One thing that isn't mentioned in the report, but it really comes off the back of me attending the domestic abuse matters training yesterday. One of the case studies involved that, it's not a local one, but it related to a victim who was aged 60. And one of the discussions that we had afterwards as a group in the training was about the difficulties for a victim in leaving a relationship when it means leaving the home, potentially going to a refuge, and how much more difficult that would be for an older person. So on the back of that training yesterday, I have commissioned a piece of work around victim ages and offending chronologies where we've got sort of long-standing couples to try and help us understand that for the future, so that we may need to do some sort of different victim offers, and it certainly may feed into the sort of commission services that you do for victims as well. So obviously early stages, it came out of the back of me attending that training yesterday, but of course we'll keep you updated on that one.
Oh, that's interesting. We've just got to be very thoughtful, haven't we, about these changes and what they all mean. But, so the population's getting older and our police force is getting younger.
Well, they certainly look younger.
No, I think they are getting younger. Okay, keep going.
That's the end of this report, Commissioner. It's only a brief one.
No, thank you very much. It's important just to flag it up and say this is something that we'll return to again. I was interested on the final page, the little book of big scams. And I guess that would be something that would be made available through LifeWise and events that are held there. But I guess they've all gone for the moment, bringing people into LifeWise.
Yeah, LifeWise obviously at the moment due to the COVID restrictions, it is available online. Although again, I appreciate that's something that's not necessarily as straightforward for some people to access as others, but the prevent officers are pushing that out wherever possible and through the neighbourhood teams.
So there are physical copies,
yes.
And it can be taken out and left in libraries or whatever. Yeah. Okay. Thank you very much, Lauren. Are there any questions from anybody around that report? So it's a topic we'll obviously return to again.
Nothing further from us,
I haven't offended anybody.
Sorry, Lauren, say that again.
So I hope we haven't offended anybody with the older category parameters.
Not at all. But we are in an interesting, from my point of view, an interesting world now where if people start making disparaging remarks about older people, you've got the President of the United States of America, I mean, was before, but is more so now. We're talking about the Pope, we're talking about the Queen. We do have to be careful, that's all. Yes. Thank you very much. And we're talking about our granny. Yeah. Thank you. That was item 11. Item 12 then, cybercrime updates. Lauren, this is you again, pages 59 to 63 of the pack.
Do you want me to go through this or the specific issues?
Do something similar, yeah.
Okay. So you had a paper on our cybercrime capability a year ago, and at that point asked for an update to be brought in about a year. So this is essentially what that paper is. So the background really hasn't changed much in the last year. I think it's probably just fair to say that technological advances available to consumers continue at a pace. And this does also, of course, mean that opportunities continue to be available for criminal use as well. Keeping pace with that change is a recognised challenge at a local, a regional and a national level. It's something that causes a lot of thought, a lot of investment, and generates a lot of conversation in policing. So we have a centralised function around digital examination and digital investigation. In that we have the DFU, who examine devices, and we also have the Digital Intelligence and Investigation Unit as well, who lead on investigations. But in addition to that, we then have localised people that are trained. So we have people at districts who can use the kiosks to do a lower level technical examination of a device. And we have locally trained DMIs as well, although I'll come on to a point about some of that training has been interrupted due to the COVID effect.
Can you just explain the kiosk?
Yeah, so the kiosk is is a machine where effectively a local officer can take a device, can take a phone, can plug it in and can look at images and text that are stored on it and do a fairly basic examination of that device. It will give them an evidential product. It's generally used in lower level offences and usually when there's an admission as well. It's not advanced enough to do deleted items or the more advanced stuff, but for the lower level stuff, it's something that can be done and it avoids devices then having to go for a full forensic examination.
Thanks.
Okay. So over the last year, we have continued to invest in this capacity, and indeed it's something which still forms part of the Specialist Crime Service review, and it's an area where undoubtedly I think it will need investment in the future as it's a business area that continues to grow. There are national developments around aiding investigations, so there's a National Cyber Tools Act which has been developed. We're currently just reviewing that at the moment to make sure it doesn't contradict anything that we do, and that will just be a handy guide that's available on officers' devices to give them some advice when they're on scene doing different things. Interestingly, and something that I think we're really proud of as a force, in addition to that, we've developed, or I say we, a member of staff from the DFU through the innovation strategy has started to develop an app which officers will be able to use when they're on scene at an offence involving some level of cyber investigation, where they'll be able to put in some details of what it is that they're facing. They'll get bespoke advice through to as significant as if they need to submit the device for a full examination, it will give them the telephone number of the person that they need to speak to for advice in getting that to happen. So it's an individual member of staff that's brought that forward, and I think that's a really excellent thing that they've done, and I'm sure I'd be happy to showcase that to you at a future opportunity.
Yes, thank you.
So I mentioned that we have started to train digital media investigators out at districts. We have a licence to train 48 people across the force this year. It's a two-part training course. The first part was rolled out successfully. Unfortunately, the second part had to be delayed due to the COVID restrictions, but we are now planning for that to take place again, so that increases our local capacity. The centralised team deal really with the most significant and serious offences, and they also give support to the internet sex offences team, who obviously deal with all of our child abuse image cases. I've already mentioned this is an area of business that continues to grow. About 20% year on year has been the trajectory, and that shows absolutely no sign of decreasing. We have recently approved a paper from the Digital Forensics Unit to increase their server capacity to enable them to sort of do more and do it more efficiently, and I think that's something that will be crossing your desk in the very near future. In relation to the mobile kiosks, which I've already mentioned, so since we've had those in place, we've had over 16,000 kiosk examinations take place. That's from November 2017 up until this October. So just in relation to that, 7,163 of them have been since last October, so in the year since you last received this report. I have mentioned the DFU being subject to the Crime Services Review. The DFU does the full forensic examination of devices, and an investigation can comprise multiple devices. So just by way of showcasing their capacity, in the last year they have dealt with in full 614 cases. So 614 investigations where they've examined multiple devices and given evidential reports in relation to that. In addition to the DFU doing that, we have had to outsource some as well. We've outsourced just over 400 to a couple of different suppliers to enable us really to keep pace with the demand that area of business gives. And these aren't cases that can wait in a lot of cases. So we've needed to do that to be able to keep the investigations up to speed to make sure that victims are getting the service that they need and offenders being brought to justice as quickly as possible. We have a cyber protect officer now. He's part of the digital investigation and intel team and does a lot of outreach work, has done work with a lot of organisations, particularly around schools, in relation to a number of areas, talks to young people about using social media safely, and also things around cyberbullying, staying safe online, etc. So that's a really important piece of work for us as well. And it's something as well that I anticipate pushing out, linking back into the last paper, into the older people communities as well. The next section of the report, section 5, talks about capacity and illustrates in here that 14 to 20% year-on-year increase in demand. We do know we have seen a fairly significant uplift this year. For example, the national fraud reports that have come through have increased by 35% so far this financial year, and much of that is linked to COVID. And indeed, we've seen some specific cyber offending around COVID, for example, trying to charge people for COVID testing, etc., etc. So that has, I think, exacerbated that business area for us this year. And the NCA have also warned already about an uplift in the number of child exploitation online offending, and we're likely to see a continued uplift in that as a consequence of lockdown and children spending more time online as well. So this it's an area of business that's really busy. It's growing year on year anyway, and actually I think the quite exceptional circumstances that we've seen through the pandemic period have led to some bespoke and significant challenges this year too. I suppose just on the final section, we're working really hard to keep pace with this. We're doing work with METIC, which looks at the 7 North East forces. They wrote earlier on this year talk about all sort of coming together into one digital forensics team. A bit too ambitious at this moment in time. What we're doing currently is looking at different forces, trying different pieces of hardware and software, making sure that we all have systems that work together and operating protocols that complement each other so that we can pour our resources as and when those opportunities arise in the future. There is a regional chief officer lead, it's the deputy from Humberside. He leads that business area. A number of, we're all obviously reporting to that, and then that links into the national structure around the business resilience centres as well.
And just on that point, how would you talk about what's done nationally, what's done regionally, what's done locally? What can you say about that in general terms?
In terms of investigation or...
Well, yes, investigation, certainly, yeah.
Okay, so in terms of investigation, I think, the fact is that locally forces investigate most of their own cyber offences. So I suppose there's two parts to this really. One is around device examination, that kind of digital footprint type piece. Then you've got offences that either have an element of being cyber enabled in them, or you get cyber offences such as denials of service, etc., etc. So as a force, in terms of looking at devices, examining, etc., we do it all ourselves, other than when we triage, or if we've got particularly complex cases where we may seek some regional support around that. In terms of investigation, most cyber-enabled investigations are dealt with locally. There is a regionalised service that's there if we need to link into it, but realistically, it's only really when you start to look at significant cyber attacks that you start to go into the regional and more likely the national structures around that.
Okay. And during this period of coronavirus lockdown particularly, have you had an increase in referrals from the National Fraud Intelligence Board, isn't it, during that time, or have you not noticed anything?
We've noticed a significant increase from the National Fraud Intelligence Board, and it's up by 35% so far this year against this time last year. So really significant, and some strange categories that come into that. So one that we see quite a lot is pet fraud. So this is pet fraud. So this is where animals are being advertised for sale. And people are being asked for significant deposits for these pets. And I think during lockdown, it's fair to say it feels like half the nation's gone out and got a dog. So you're getting animals advertised for sale, people being asked to pay significant deposits, running into hundreds, if not thousands of pounds sometimes, and then actually those animals never exist. So that's one which I think is a fairly new one. There's been quite a lot of uplifting Facebook hacking, so people having their Facebook and other social media accounts hacked into, and then the person who's hacked that account purports to be in debt, in financial troubles, often due to COVID, and they put the bank account details online and ask people to put money into the accounts. And as well, and I'm sure a lot of people have had the emails which purport to be from HMRC or from a COVID coordination centre saying, oh, you can get help with this, you can get help with that, you can get this test, we just need to pay for that. And actually these are all completely fraudulent activities, but they're all taking place online.
Okay, so we can expect with the second lockdown more.
And I think I mean, there's a lot of messaging going out about this, and certainly we are pushing out the messages on social media around don't respond to these. You won't ever get people asking you for this level of detail and asking you for bank details and the like. But there are some people that we find difficult to reach with those messages, and unfortunately they're the ones more vulnerable to falling for it.
Yeah. Well, thank you very much indeed, Lauren. And again, it's one of those topics we're bound to return to. Is there anybody on the call who wants to ask any questions or make any comments? No, I think that's it, Lauren. Thank you very much indeed.
Thank you.
Shall we move in our agenda then to the final part, which is Chief Executive reporting, item 15, PCC decisions. Is that Erica on pages 65 to 69?
Alan, it's myself because Erica's on leave. I don't know whether you can see me.
We can.
I'll put the camera on. This just captures the decisions that you've made since the last Public Accountability Board, Commissioner. The first one of note for public interest is the redirection of certain funds from the Violence Reduction Unit towards community safety partnerships, 30,000 in each of the four boroughs to use towards their action plan at reducing serious violence. The other areas are very much around prevention, early intervention and tackling the root causes of crime. Apart from at 4.2.3, you'll see you've approved some additional funding for improvements at Atlas Court. I wasn't proposing to go into any of the detail. It's set out there, Commissioner, unless anybody's got any questions.
Does anybody dare to have questions about PCC decisions? No, I think we carry on then, Michelle.
No problem. The next report then, Commissioner, is an update on the strategic planning process, which is led by you and your office, but of course we're heavily dependent on support from the force. We've been working primarily with the interim director of resources and the interim chief finance officer. That's Jackie and Debbie. Debbie's been on earlier during PAB. We're working really well as a group to work out the Chief Constable's need based on the Chief Constable's assessment with his command team and input from district commanders, heads of departments, etc., on those pressure points around their assessment of future demand and current demand, and whether the Chief Constable's ask of the PCC's budget is greater than the financial envelope available. And of course, you've already pointed to hard times ahead in the short and medium term, and some hard choices that will have to be made. So what we're working on now together for you to receive at your November Planning and Efficiency Group is a list of proposals around areas that need growth in the force and areas where efficiency savings have been identified. There'll be a suite of choices for you to make. We consult with partners and the public on those where it's appropriate to do so. Fiona's team in engagement and comms have already consulted on the priorities, the local priorities in the area. So there's various pieces of information coming in to paint a picture for you. And then finally, you will consult on the council tax precept that people will pay in our locality, which will go to the police and crime panel. I know the members are on the call today. There is a budget working group which underpins the police and crime panel, so that the panel members are taken through, Sophie as your chief finance officer, through the various stages of building the budget. But we are heavily dependent on the Chancellor's statement around the funding for policing, what will be topsliced, what will be kept for national enabling programmes and such like, and how much will be available, and the flexibility that you will have to raise council tax locally to meet the demands that are required for policing and your other wider responsibilities that aren't the police budget. Wasn't proposing to say any more, Commissioner. There'll be a further update after the November Planning and Efficiency Group about how things are shaping up. Sorry, just a final mention around the police and crime plan, because it is a dual track process. We're refreshing the police and crime plan with its priorities at the same time as we're building the budget. The report makes clear that you don't foresee any change to the priorities, because the priorities and a new police and crime plan is tagged to a police and crime commissioner's term, and of course the PCC election was deferred from this May to next May 2021. Unless there's any questions, Commissioner, that's the report.
Thank you. Are there any comments or questions on that? If not, then PAB work programme, Michelle, 71 to 86.
And nothing to say there, Commissioner. It's routinely distributed with the papers so that people know what's coming up for the next meeting.
Is there any other business?
None's been notified.
In that case, I think none can be taken. So thank you very much indeed, everybody, and thank you particularly for those who've prepared the reports. I know it may feel that we don't always do them the justice that they deserve, but our time is limited and we have to focus on particular things, but they are read and they are thought-provoking. I do thank you for them. Thank you very much indeed. At the date and time of our next meeting is the 10th of December. We shall be out of lockdown. Fingers crossed. We'll be on our way to a vaccine and hopefully we'll be on our way to a normal kind of meeting. But thank you very much indeed.